Today we're going to jump back in time. Not that far back, but to a year that really changed the game for online learning, 2008. It might feel like a completely different world, but we're about to see how that one single year, through the eyes of a real pioneer, basically built the foundation for everything we think of as digital learning today.
So let's just paint a picture of 2008, right? I mean, this was a huge year. You had Wikipedia absolutely exploding, passing 10 million articles. The entire world was glued to their screens for the Beijing Olympics. And then, bam, the global economy gets rocked by the collapse of Lehman Brothers. But kind of bubbling under all that huge news, something else was happening. Web 2.0 was going mainstream. You know, the whole idea of a social, interactive internet that we just take for granted now. That right there, that was the stage.
So yeah, while everyone's talking about the economy and who's winning gold medals, there's this quiet revolution brewing in the background, in education. The question on the minds of a few innovators wasn't about bailouts or world records. It was something much bigger. What is the future of learning actually going to look like? And that question leads us straight to the first huge problem they had to solve, the problem of invisibility. I mean, in the early days of online learning, if you were a student, you were basically a ghost, just a name on a registration list, totally isolated and completely invisible to your classmates and even your instructors. And believe me, this was not a small problem. Look at this number. By August of 2008, just one school in Norway had enrolled 100,000 online students. Think about that for a second. That is an entire city's worth of learners who, for the most part, had no idea the others even existed.
And this quote from Morten Flate Paulsen just hits the nail on the head. He points out that, these distant students are busy people. They've got jobs, they've got families, they're scattered all over the map. They just disappear. So the big question was, how on earth do you build a community, or even just a sense of identity out of that?
Well, the solution they came up with was, honestly, it was brilliant and so simple. A total Web 2.0 move. They created a public student catalog. It was kind of like a proto-LinkedIn, just for students. You could create a profile with your photo, list your experience, and then you just tick this one little box for global visibility. And just like that, poof, you weren't just an entry in a database anymore. You were a real person with a real online identity.
And they didn't stop there. They took it a step further and created something called a roll of honor. And this is basically the birth of the digital badges and credentials we see everywhere today. The more courses you finished, the higher your status, from senior student to fellow to senior fellow. All of a sudden, your hard work wasn't something you were just doing alone in your house. It was visible, it was celebrated, and it was credentialed for the whole world to see.
Okay, so making students visible, that was huge, but really it was just the first piece of the puzzle. Because once you give people an identity, you can start working on a much bigger mission, making education accessible to literally everyone, no matter who they are or where they are.
And nothing captures this mission quite like this quote. After going to a workshop about education in prisons, Paulsen had this incredible realization. He imagined being cut off from the internet for 10 years, and it hit him. In our world, that's not just an inconvenience. You're being deprived of a basic human skill. And that reframed the whole conversation. Online learning wasn't a nice to have anymore. It was starting to look like a fundamental right. And look, it's one thing to have a big idea, but it's another thing to actually make it happen. You can imagine the pushback, right? You can't just give inmates internet. But the innovators back then pretty much said, oh yeah, watch us. They got to work building the actual tech to make it secure. Things like special gateways, systems that could only receive information but not send it out, all carefully logged. They were solving the hard problems to make the impossible possible.
And this mission of access went way beyond prisons. I mean, just look at the makeup of the student body back then. It was so diverse. A whopping 70% were women, many juggling family and work. You had students with disabilities, people in rehabilitation, citizens living abroad in over 35 countries. The key takeaway here is that for so many of these people, online learning wasn't just an option, it was the only option they had. So, the students were getting connected, but what about the educators? The people actually building this new world of e-learning were also pretty isolated. They needed a way to connect, to share what was working, to figure this all out together. They literally had to build a global community from the ground up. And how they do it? Well, they used international conferences, but they gave them that Web 2.0 twist. At a big conference in Lisbon, they launched the first ever conference blog, connecting hundreds of people from 42 nations online. And then in Paris, get this,
They did something truly radical for the time. At UNESCO headquarters, they gave the stage to a real, actual online student to present.
And that student's name was Thor Stainsland. And his presentation? Wow. It was not some dry academic theory. It was his real life. He talked about how in the world you managed to juggle 28 self-paced courses, 3 kids, and a demanding job in the North Sea. His advice was so practical. Focus on family, work, and studies. Cut the other stuff. It just grounded the entire academic conversation in human reality.
So let's pull all this together. We've heard these stories from 2008, but what does it all mean for us, right now, in the world of online learning we're all living in?
I mean, you can draw a straight line from then to now. That problem of student invisibility in 2008, that led directly to the digital credentials and LinkedIn profiles we all use today. The isolation of the educators, that was solved by the amazing global online communities we now rely on. Those basic early blogs and forums, they evolved into the slick, integrated social learning platforms inside our courses now. And that huge mission for access, that paved the way for the mobile learning that puts a classroom in every single one of our pockets.
It's pretty clear, isn't it? The core challenges they were tackling in 2008, identity, access, and community, they became the very pillars of our modern online learning world. The seeds they planted back then have grown into the vast digital ecosystem we navigate every single day. Which really leaves us with one last question to think about. The pioneers of 2008, their whole job was to make online learning possible. They solved these huge, immense challenges just to get us here. But maybe our challenge today is a different one. It's not about possibility anymore. We know it's possible. The real question for us is, how do we make all of this technology-driven education not just accessible, but truly deeply meaningful?